to this House.
Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Speaker, I wasn't going to take a call on this debate, but I felt compelled and challenged by that what I consider a living work of art in this chamber, sir, in political terms. No, not you. I was referring to John Hayes, sir, but not that member over there. That member would be akin to sort of, some of the Egyptian art that we now see, sort of some of that archaeology that we see, sort of political archaeology over there. But I'm reminded, sir, this bill is, and for the record, I think we should make it plain that a dinosaur that Mr. Grosser, I think, said, a dinosaur. That's a very good analogy for that member sitting in the corner that just spoke. But I think it's good to set the record straight, sir, because when it comes to resourcing the arts, no government can do better than the previous Clark government in that respect. And I remember when Lord of the Rings was being proposed and schemes of arrangement were put in place by the then Clark government, the cries of derision from those who now sit on that side, sir, that this was PC gone mad and all sorts of other things. I remember going to many meetings, and after Lord of the Rings was progressed by Mr. Jackson, there was the realisation that because of the Clark government schemes of arrangement and respected arts and the film industry, we now have a film industry in this country. We now have jobs for editors, for lighting technicians, for actors. There is now an industry. They don't have to whip across the ditches they're doing at 1,000 people a week in all the other sort of sectors and go or over to the States to become famous and professional and contribute and have a career and a lucrative career. They can now do it in New Zealand. But the cries of derision from that side as we increase the arts budget. I remember Bill English having a really good go as we increased the arts budget, saying this was wasteful expenditure. And now of course we're left with this. I was trying to think of some art terms to describe this piece of legislation. And I'm sure Mr. Grosser, who I'm told is a doyen of the arts and an expert. In fact, there was a suspicion, I'm told, historians did look closely at the record that he may have painted the Mona Lisa. It may have been Mr. Grosser, but I know Mr. Grosser would agree with me. This is like a sort of Jackson Pollock painting. Now, Jackson Pollock did some amazing paintings. I'm reliably advised. The Blue Limes was one where he would not have a strategy in his mind when he faced the canvas. There was no strategy. He would simply pick up the paint and hurl it willy-nilly at the canvas, and great art would materialise, and I acknowledge Jackson Pollock's great contribution to the arts world. But I'm told by art historians that there was no strategy. This was sort of impulse. Pick up some paint, pick up some, bit like the National Party's economic policy, pick up some paint and hurl it at the canvas, and it will sit where it lays, where it hits. And this is what this bill is very similar to. Mr. Grosser, I see him nodding, as a person who knows far more about the art world than I do, far more about the art world than I do or will ever know. Mr. Grosser knows exactly what. And another great artwork that I was thinking of that could describe, sir, this bill and the authors of it is that famous work by Munch called The Screen. Now, you will know this. It's a very expensive painting. The Scream. A person holding their hands up, screaming in anguish. And, sir, it reminded me of John Banks. It reminded me of John Banks when the boom was lowered on him in respect of his dodgy dealings around Kim.com. The sort of Scream. In fact, the visual image, I'm wondering if Munch had a premonition many years ago when he did paint that and think of Johnny Banks, that may have been an inspiration for him. John Banks went to his birthday party, my colleague. So, well, anything is possible. But I don't, but Mr. Banks, of course, wouldn't be able to remember. But I say this, the reason we are opposing this bill is because it is not well thought out. There are, and the Speaker from New Zealand First, I think, made some very, very valid points around representation. If we're really, truly wanting to embrace our communities, our diverse communities, such that they are far more diverse than they were 20, 30, 40 years ago, we even have people like Mr. Hayes here, then we should have appropriate representation on these arts bodies. That makes not only common sense, it makes a lot of sense in terms of having artistic sense. It makes sense because those communities are represented. And as other speakers have said, our Pacific Island community, our Maori community, our ethnic communities, young people, they all come to the arts world from a different perspective. Sorry? Huh? Sorry, I was just wondering. Did somebody pull that member out of the crypt Did they sort of like an old canvas and pull him out, dust him off and then shove him back because he's not up to standard? You know, these new guys are showing some enthusiasm. Obviously the John Hayes, tutorials are working soon. But we oppose this because it does not make sense. It is not good policy. It has not been thought out. And again, I say, like the Jackson Pollock artwork, Mr Finlayson's got up, thrown a bit of paint on the canvas, sloshed it around a bit, and now is trying to flog it off to the New Zealand people as one of the grand masters. Well, sorry, it doesn't work. And those communities who've been left out in the cold, who are not represented well on this, but make massive contributions. I recall Mr Grosser making a valid comment last week about the Maori language, te reo. I think he made some very valid points. The same could be said for representation in the arts community, for our ethnic communities, our Indigenous communities and others. So the question I pose to those sort of relics on the other side, the sort of political version of archaeology we have over there, who left the country sort of economic archaeology as they take over. Why is it that these people are being limited in their representation? No speaker has got up. Maybe Mr Goldsmith could tell us, because he, I'm sure, has made a contribution to the arts world, sir, in a literary sense, as a biographer, authorised and unauthorised, of John Banks. And I'm told, sir, that there is another piece of literary prose on its way from Mr Goldsmith, and that is Mr Banks's final weighty tome, his obituary, sir, which Mr Goldsmith is labouring long and hard into the evening to write with great artistic finesse, great literary substance, the final chapter, the rise and fall of John Banks. So maybe Mr Goldsmith could tell us, or Mr Burrows being a minister, why it is that this representation is being so limited, why it is that the National Party has slashed the budgets in the arts community, why it is that they won't actually, why they won't follow their fine words with fine actions. And my colleague said, yes, they've painted themselves into a corner, excuse the pun. Well done, Mr Little, I thought that was a cracker. Why it is that fine words are not followed by fine actions. Oh, silence. Silence, that's very interesting, isn't it? Silence. Oh, they've woken up again. Mr Hayes made history today by making a shorter speech than Mr Bakshi. So I just say we oppose it, but we oppose it on good grounds, and we oppose it because we have gone out and talked to those within the arts community and listened to what their needs and concerns are. We make an offer to the government. We believe this legislation can be improved if Mr Finlayson is willing to listen, willing to cooperate and take account of new ideas from our communities. We make that offer to him because there should be actually no politics in this. But we draw the line in that we do not support invalid, limited legislation which doesn't actually do the job. So yet again we see a nice little political pamphlet here that'll be paraded around the country by some, but the problem is when they go to the art galleries and when they go and talk to the communities as they're practising their skills around the country, the communities will see through this and they will have to explain what they haven't explained to this Parliament. Why the limit on the representation? Why not break it out and widen it to all those in our community? Isn't that what art is about? Getting it out into the roots of our community, getting those talented people, unleashing their skill, making a contribution. These are the sort of words that the National Party likes to trumpet occasionally. But again, fine words, sir, are never followed by appropriate or substantive actions. So I put that to them and I invite the next speaker, whoever that may be, to paint us a canvas, in a verbal canvas in political speak and simply answer this. Answer the questions that have been put to you. Why the limit in representation? Why won't they widen it? And why won't they support legislation with resources appropriately tailored to our communities?
Paul Goldsmith.
Goldfinger.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I'd like to speak in favour of this Arts Council New Zealand toy